Good evening. It, it, it's been a while since I've been here. How many weeks? From the 17th of May. So a few days have gone by. So many things have happened in the meantime. It seems a little far away, but at the same time, quite close. Today, there will be something a little strange, something that I've never had to do. And I'll need to take a break in the middle because halfway through, I have an appointment with a very important Lama, and I couldn't say no. And it'll be about 10 minutes long. Um, it seems a little bit strange, but I will leave you. I will leave you for a few minutes. To tell you now, otherwise it'll seem strange, as if something were wrong. So, okay. Something important that I wanted to talk about today, first off, is there are different aspects of the teachings. And I'm convinced that at the beginning, they were very practical and very real, pragmatic aspects of the lives of the early practitioners. But then gradually, over time, those concepts, those teachings, those views, so that they could stay over time, they were transformed in, let's call them traditions, ceremonies, things that are said that should be done. And one can be very attached to this ceremonial, symbolic aspect when instead these things should have to do with our daily lives. So many things like this. We can start with the most obvious, even though it's obvious that it has to do with our lives, but we see it as something separate. And for example, the Four Noble Truths. When Buddha talked about the Four Noble Truths and when these teachings were handed down that make reference to, okay, what is suffering? What are the causes of suffering? What is the cessation of suffering, and how can we reach this state of peace after the cessation of suffering, of the so-called nirvana? But don't need to I don't need to understand suffering in general. I need to understand my own. The question isn't what is the cause of suffering in a generalized philosophical way. The question has to do with my own suffering. What's the cause of my own suffering? Otherwise, we can become the classic Buddhists. Excuse my irony. And normally, I'm not very ironic, but in this case, the classic Buddhist that says, if you ask, what are the causes of suffering? And they would say, well, obviously, suffering is generated from ignorance, this grasping at an objective self, an objective reality that generates this obsession with self grasping and through which one acts through defilements, generating these negative actions, a so-called negative karma that creates a kind of process, a chain that then manifests as a negative internal seed that then continues. So that creates this so-called samsara, this incessant cycle. That's beautiful, right? Well, after 3 minutes, not even five, something happens, and it's your fault. And where's the mental defilement and ignorance and the law of karma and all the rest? So sometimes there's this attitude, in Tibetan we say, when you study the correct view of reality, it's said to not deepen concepts, philosophical concepts, as if you were watching a movie. In Tibetan, it's not film but show. So I'm watching a show in front of me, and something that's happening in front of me, but doesn't have to do with me directly, even if most shows are really just mirrors of of ourselves. But that's another topic. But it's very important when we come into contact with the teachings, we need to observe ourselves, because one thing is asking what's the causes of suffering in general. Obviously, in the specific, I am a part of the general. So if the cause is ignorance and selfishness, generally speaking, then I that refers to me too. But practically speaking, if I don't look at my own suffering, my own feelings, my own sensations, not philosophical ideas about suffering, I mean, what I'm living on my own skin, and it's not easy to accept that it doesn't is not caused by this, that, or the other, because I've I've heard, for example, it's true that it comes from ignorance, but look at this one. If that person didn't do like this, or that one didn't act like this, then I wouldn't be in this situation. I don't know. I have a theory. It's not what I wanted to talk about today, but before this pause, let's see if I'm able to tell you. It's a theory that comes from my own personal experience, and it's my own. So it could be right or wrong. So don't take it as something absolute. My theory is that each one of us in this moment in our lives, according to the certain mechanisms that I wouldn't be able to actually define, it's as if we're living a certain kind of cycle, a certain result. It's explained that the results of our past actions, we live it through sensation, pleasure, um, um, something unpleasurable, or neutrality. So it's almost like we have a certain amount of the suffering to experience. And then, so even if you add other problems, if you're, you add more problems, that amount of suffering is the same. Or if you take away problems, the same. I don't know if I'm explaining myself well. I mean, it's almost like at this moment, the fruit is that one is living is contained in a certain amount of of um, of suffering. So sometimes you even have to create a problem. And what happens is it's not that the more problems I have, the more suffering I feel. Normally, what happens is as we add up the problems, they substitute themselves depending on the level of seriousness. Oh, I had this worry, but now I have this greater problem. I don't know if you have the experience like this. So there are times where one is absolutely fine no matter what happens. Oh yeah, that happened, but that's no problem. So in my theory is that what comes up the to the top is just the tip of the iceberg. There are many other cycles, many other dynamics that are more subtle, that are deeper, and I have really no idea how it all works. But I'm sure that they exist. In these last months, I had I had an experience, two events. One just in these last few days. Many of you will remember the story of the transformation cabin, where I was upset that we needed to build these electrical transformation cabins, and they were so expensive. And I said, no one has to build them. I mean, I don't know how many of you have, thousands thousands of square meters that need to consume like mega kilowatts. I mean, we have a house like this. The center is really big. And so we had to make these transformation cabins, for the electricity. It was incredibly expensive. And when I was told, it seemed absurd that we needed to do this. And I really put myself in the position of the victim. Um, when they told me the price, the structure is too. I mean, the structure is quite large, and I had never seen something like that. And why do I need to make something like this? And it was really the only time that I really was arguing with the architect. And then he said, "No, no, it's at these transformation cabins are everywhere." And I said, "No, it's not true. I've never seen one." And then one day, as I was in the middle of this story, I was driving, going Albagnano to Malpensa Airport, a trip that I've had done thousands of times, and I saw one after the other. The old ones are vertical and the newer ones are horizontal, but they are everywhere, these transformation cabins. So what I realized was when there's topic, a subject that starts to, 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 to touch something, it starts popping up everywhere. There are two subjects. I mean, things that are quite delicate. One happened recently, and then another one was around February or when I went to Nepal. When you start touching a subject that normally you don't talk about, and then that thing comes up like mushrooms everywhere. I don't know. At some point, one thinks maybe people are listening to my phone calls, or they're we who how how is it possible that you came to me to talk about this specific thing? I mean, I don't know exactly what the dynamics are behind that, but what I've observed is what happens at the top on the surface is a manifestation of what's happening underneath. And what happens underneath, we don't know. I'm speaking for myself, and we don't have this awareness. I don't know exactly how it happens, but there are certain rules that little by little one is able to see. Another thing that it feels like when you're living a cycle of suffering, you need to wait for that cycle to end. Here's a detail though. As you live that cycle of suffering, so my phone call has arrived. So as the cycle of suffering arrives, it's important to not create other causes to increase and to increase that suffering. Okay, so let's do some mantra while I take this phone call. Okay. After that, that after that short commercial break, here we are. It's important, and I learned over these years quite spontaneously that when we when we're the ones who ask for some things, we're the ones who have to adapt. So I asked for some specific advice to this master, and he was extremely busy, and he was able to talk to me in this period. So and it was and it was important to respect um, his time. Anyway, getting back to us, I'm sure that under what we perceive, there are many things that happen. Some say that dreams are a way to access what's happening, but I'll tell you what I think, but I don't really understand what it is, what's there, what's not there, or how. There, the variables are too many. Too many are the things that interact for me to be able to say, I've understood. I can understand a small part, but then as soon as have a slightly different perspective, then I see something else. I've understood from my point of view, but then looking from someone else's point of view or somewhere else, there's more. But as things repeat themselves, one starts understanding, and one of these things is when we start living a kind of cycle. So as long as the cycle doesn't end, there we are. And the important key is that when we're in a cycle where there are particular difficulties, where there's specific suffering, so one of the most important things through with which we have freedom, it's really important to see how we are reacting to all of this. Because what I'm living in this present moment, what I'm experiencing, is the result of something that has come in the past. It's a cycle that's manifesting. But how I react to this present moment is a new cause that I'm creating for a future result, for something that will happen in the future. Let's give a very simple example. Someone that we know, for example, at a certain point is upset about something that we did or said, and a tension comes about. It can happen, right? So there's that moment of tension, and that person who's upset comes to us with an attitude, a little arrogant, aggressive, let's say in a non-pleasurable way. And so, what do we do do we say, yes, that's right, what I did didn't end well, I'm sorry? Or, no, I think it was the right thing to do, but let's try to understand each other better, and it ends there? Or do I react based on your reaction? Oh, so, okay, you were upset about that. Now I'm going to show you really why you should be upset. And so what happens is not only do we not only do we live a result, but we create a new one. It's like to eliminate a debt, I take out another loan. So one key for us in our lives, generally speaking, is when we live something, and I'm convinced that what I'm living is not caused exclusively by what is in front of me and what I'm able to understand. I'm not a victim, first of all, and neither are any of you. None of us are victims, but we have the choice of how we want to act and interact based on what we live. So you tell me, do you know anyone who tell me if you know anyone in their lifetime who didn't at some point have a problem? Oh, the great masters. perhaps. Speaking like this, Lama Gangchen, I and I saw for myself, Lama Gangchen had so many problems of all types. And he would say, when he talked about his own master, he too had many, many problems. Yesterday, I was speaking with a friend, another Lama, who said, Lama Tsongkhapa, he was telling me, Lama Tsongkhapa, Lama Tsongkhapa. Lama Tsongkhapa, at a certain point in his lifetime, first he was a practitioner who lived in the mountains. No one knew him and no one bothered him. The day that Lama Tsongkhapa started teaching more and started having more disciples, and his way of teaching was innovative. He received he got so many problems. They didn't call him Lama Tsongkhapa. They called him the Lama with a big nose. The Tibetans have it with big nose people. So the Tibetans in the central Tibet around Lhasa and Shigatse, they have a nose that's a little pug nose, like Lama Gangchen, that was a little pushed in, like Lama Gangchen. So when they make reference to Westerners, they say yellow head, big nosed. So Westerners are that's a pejorative way of calling Westerners the yellow heads with big nose. It's not used anymore. But when I heard, from Tibetans, jokingly, when they would maybe they would generalized and when they would complain, about some kind of behavior from Westerners, they would use this. So anyway, Lama Tsongkhapa was called the big nose Lama. On a side note, it's interesting that in our culture, if we want to say something pejorative, often we use a sexual context. In the Tibetan context, not at all. The worst you could say to someone is the corpse of your dad, of your father, which is pretty heavy. But that's the worst of the pejorative. Not that I know them all, but all of this to say that Lama Tsongkhapa at a certain point in his life, when he started teaching, he had so many problems. People of every kind that said that his teachings were false, that he was tricking people. And they had everything and more to say, but he stayed still, just to say. Often we make reference to the life of Jesus. I mean, did Jesus have problems? Or did it all go well for him? To say, let's take the examples of the most famous people that we know. I mean, Buddha Shakyamuni, he had his cousin Devadatta, and at a certain point, Buddha, actually, when he was still the Prince Siddhartha, he didn't want to do anything to become king. He didn't give any importance to becoming king, and instead it was his father who really was keen on him becoming king, and instead his cousin wanted to be king. But given that his father, that the father of Buddha, in the hierarchy of the Shakyas, of the Shakyas, he called on the son of his brother, the cousin of Prince Siddhartha, to influence him to have more attachment to the becoming a king. But by doing this, by coming and living near Prince Siddhartha, he lost his choice, his possibility, his chance of becoming a king. So he had he was tremendously envious of him, and always was plotting against him. And when Prince Siddhartha left the palace and then became known as Buddha, Devadatta followed him. He entered in the spiritual community. He tried to create division in the spiritual community. So many stories. He tried to kill him 5 times. He poisoned him. He threw a huge stone as he went by. So what I mean to say is, at the end of the day, if this happens to Buddha, to Jesus, to Lama Tsongkhapa, then what about us? Each one of us. Do we really want to live in this idealized view that everything is going to go fine? I don't want to take away the illusion, anyone's illusion. Well, actually, I do. What happens is the problems exist and they will always be there. So we shouldn't be surprised. Today in one way, tomorrow in another. But where's the real point here for me? When we live difficulties, how are we going to react to them? How do I react in front of this difficulty? Let's talk about small daily things. And then there are moments that are more meaningful, that are bigger events. But what happens is we react. The real gymnasium is our daily life. And when we're living a problem of interferences or problems, like that proverb that says it rains where it's wet. And some people come to me and say, and this happened, and then this happened too. Well, it happens like that. Well, it starts here, and then it seems like it's not right to say you have to pay, with this, with that, but it's almost like an energy that until it all gets used up, it needs to come out and get used up. I think that when there's certain situations, one needs to wait for a while, have some patience, remembering that that situation, that moment will pass. And number two, have the strength to not get into certain dynamics that are unhealthy. In other words, to not take out new loans to pay the current debt. Because, and then when a new cycle starts, because one can go over, maybe you have a difficult cycle that's happening at work, but things are going well at home. There are many cycles of many different contexts that superimpose one over the other. So it's just, but remember, and this is easy, but it means so much. One thing is one thing, and another thing is another thing. And it's not because there's something difficult that I can't enjoy beautiful things that are happening. The first time that I understood this more clearly, I was in India. We were traveling with Lama Gangchen. About 50 people were with us, Westerners. And we were going from the monastery of Gandhin to the city of the town of Bangalore. And it was a nighttime in the bus. And in the middle of the night, we had an accident. It was a big accident. In front of a bus, there was a big tractor with hay, but the amount of hay was like double the tractor. It was enormous. So we couldn't see. It was in front of us. Someone on the other side tried to go to pass him, and there was we had a um, we we hit head on the bus and this other vehicle. Lama Gangchen was quite hurt. He broke a tooth. Someone else broke their arm in 7 places. So those who were hurt went to the hospital, but Lama Gangchen, before accepting to go into the hospital, he wanted to see each person, and then the next day, there was a conference in Bangalore, and his face was like this, and he said he was coming like Ganesha, who has the face of an elephant. He was making fun of what had happened. What I mean to say is, I was right in front, and there was the little window. I hit the window, and luckily that window just fell out. And so I was quite okay, and I helped people get out of the bus. And after the first emergency had passed, Lama Gangchen and Kozila, they went to the hospital, and the others were quite okay. So I got out of the bus, and 2 things happened. One, I got out of the bus, and you could see that there was like liquid coming out of the bus. It could be dangerous, no? So I tell the people, let's go out quickly. And then I heard people, I can't find my purse. I say, okay, then maybe you won't be needing it. It's better to get off of the bus. And then maybe later you can go in and get it. You can get it. And then we understood that it wasn't dangerous, and then the person could go on and get her things. As soon as we got off the bus, I looked up. And I have to say that it was a starry night, one of the most beautiful nighttime skies that I had ever seen. We were far from any important city. We were in the middle of the fields. It was an evening without moon, without clouds, and there were stars that were absolutely marvelous. And I was outside looking, and I started telling people, have you looked at the beautiful sky? And they were looking at me as if I were crazy, saying, in front of what has just happened, you're standing there looking at the sky. And I thought, what? There's nothing to do now except wait, for them to get us. So yes, we've done what we needed to do, and so now we can let's try to enjoy the sky. And it was a real lesson for me that even when we're in the middle of a difficulty, and the difficulties that are there and that will come, one thing is one thing and another thing is another thing. So we can listen to the birds sing, we can watch the sunset, enjoy the sunrise, enjoy time with people. It's fundamental. Also, Lama Gangchen Rinpoche, before dying, physically he was really down. He was really weak, and he wanted to come down and sit at the table. And I said, Rinpoche, no, please. And he always knew what he wanted for himself, but in that so in that moment I thought, I wasn't going to go against him, but I said, please, tell me why. And it was a beautiful teaching for me. He said, because we need to enjoy. We need to enjoy our lives, so independently of our problems. We need to live things with joy. And so it's true that on one side there are problems, but one shouldn't take away from the other. And this takes me to the point that I wanted to talk about mostly this evening. When we have beautiful cycles, we need to enjoy them in the best way possible, but it's not enough. Not just enjoy them and then waiting, knowing they're going to end. Of course it will end, but future cycles depend on how we live that cycle, because it's not sure that after a beautiful cycle that a negative one will come. What's important is that as we're living a cycle, it it will finish at some point. You know, when the sun comes up in the morning, then there's the sunset in the evening. There's no choice. But the way I live my day today is going to influence is going to influence my following day. So it's important to create positive interdependence. And so when we have difficult situations, the key is how I act in front of this situation. Because what I see, and I think about my own life, many, many things have happened. I've lived many different situations, many marvelous situations, many other difficult situations of all types. When I see this, I see that the situations that we're living at that moment, it seems like that's it. And I'm sure that each one of you is living a certain situation in your life, and in that moment, it seems like it's the universe, it's everything, it's the whole world can be summarized in that. And then at a certain point, it ends, right? And one way or the other, and when it ends, we continue. And the way I lived that influences strongly the way I shape myself, the way I transform, and then what I become in the face of that situation. Because one thing is living a difficult situation, another is cultivating anger, resentment, getting sick because your liver is bitter. This is clear, isn't it? Okay, there's that thing. Let's face it. But let's say something. I mean, let's say the truth. We're selfish, aren't we? At the basis, yes. And well, so let's do it well, in the sense, if our well-being is so important to ourselves, let's do that well. So if there's a problem, let's face it, let's resolve it, but let's not poison ourselves. Don't don't cultivate hate, anger, resentment, anxiety. Very often, it's not about what's happening at that moment, but actually have to do with our inability to accept that what is happening doesn't correspond to the idea that we had, or how the expectations that we had. Normally, it doesn't. Our inability to accept the most natural thing that exists, which is change. This is what often makes us upset. So I don't see that I have control over anyone or what happens around me, but I have control up to a certain point. I try to have more and more on the way that I live what happens what what happens around me. This is quite clear, isn't it? So it's important here to remember it's important to remember this, have coherence, to be clear about how we want to transform ourselves as the days go by, as our lives go by. And then there's something else that I've brought many times, and more I see how important it is, because we often have this tendency to generalize. We we see someone dressed in red who who sings well, and we say, oh, those who dress in red, they are good singers. Or we see someone who's dressed in red and who is quite rude, and then we say, oh, those dressed in red are rude. Or we see someone who acts in a certain way, and then we say, oh, you see that person, you see how he is. This is a tendency to generalize that is not beneficial to us. And together with this tendency to generalize, what we do is we also judge the people instead of judging the actions. How does it work? We have two basic fundamental energies that are very important. The two energies that are that generally that direct that what's the right word? That give the direction, that guide, that direct, you know, that they reign over. The two main energies. There's attraction and aversion. Just look, you know, just when someone does something, I mean, there are three reasons. There are only three reasons why someone does what they do. Not just in Buddhism, but in that you can see this in the many studies on human behavior. There are three reasons why a person does what he does. Or because it brings a benefit, or he's able to avoid something harmful, or morally it should be done for a moral reason. These are the three reasons that push us all to do what we do. Oh, because there's attraction or there's aversion. The two strengths that we can't live without. Sometimes I hear people say, well, how is it possible in Buddhism, you know, that you're supposed to live without desire? No, there's no movement without desire. Does a Buddha have desire? Here's a question. Does a Buddha have attraction and aversion? It's not a trick question. Does the Buddha have love? Compassion? What's love? Is attraction for happiness. Compassion is aversion for suffering. So naturally, there's attraction and aversion. The problem isn't about having attraction or aversion, but towards what? Because that's what really creates problems. When we have aversion for what is not the real cause of our suffering, or we have attraction for what cannot sustain happiness, that's what causes problems. Let's take anyone in the world. A person is made up of many, many aspects. Aspects that we think are beautiful, others that are negative, you know, positive, negative, beautiful, ugly. I mean, how often have we judged someone saying this person is like this? It can happen, no? It's more rare the opposite. How often have we judged ourselves? I am this. But actually, we're a flow of many actions, and anyone I meet, there are aspects that are positive, others that are I think negative. It does things that I agree with, others that I don't. Normally, what happens if there's someone who, that in our opinion is a horrible person and does something that we think is positive, is difficult to accept. You know, Hitler was a vegetarian. Oh, that can't be true. Why? He took really good care of his dogs. Oh, that can't be true. I don't know because I wasn't there, but I've been told this. So one thing doesn't take away from the other. Like if we have an enormous attraction towards someone, like the Tibetan proverb, so the grass is always, the grasses the grass is always greener on the other side, but they've also added, and one's own child is always right. So what happens when there's someone for whom we have an enormous attraction that at a certain point does something that we think is wrong? So what would our tendency be to see that negative act or justify? So why? Why do we act like this? That it's hard to see something negative in someone, as someone for whom we have attraction. Um, we judge the person and not the actual actions. So we shouldn't judge the person. The person, each one of us, we're made up of thousands of different things. Instead, we should judge actions and traits. I can say, your way of doing, I don't like. It doesn't mean that I have anything against you. I, I, I just don't like this way of acting. If I judge the person and I put you in a in in a category of aversion, and then what kind of feelings do I have towards you? I mean, anger and hate, that comes from aversion. If I judge the action instead, at this point, my aversion goes towards the person or to the action. I could say, whether I like you or not, I don't know, but this way of behaving, I really don't like. I can say this way of behaving is wrong, or this character trait I don't like, or I don't like, you know. I can even talk about physical traits, hair like this, but one thing is a specific trait or specific action that I think is good, bad, or neutral. Another thing is actually judging the person. And this works also towards ourselves, because what's one of the negative sides of this? I mean, towards our own selves, we have more attraction or aversion. Our ten that tendency is more towards attraction. What happens is when we see something that when someone criticizes us, do we say, "Oh, thank you for pointing that out"? No, we become defensive. It's a very important exercise. It doesn't. I know I know what I am, what I feel, and so what you think about me or say about me doesn't change who I am. There was an example. What I am or what I'm not doesn't depend on what anyone else says or thinks. There's a part of the teachings that says if anyone, those can come, everyone can come to me and say that I'm God on earth. It doesn't make me a God. Or if they come to me and say that I'm a demon, that doesn't make me a demon. What determines what I am are my feelings, my behavior, etc., on which I need to have a very high level of transparency with myself and a great level of sincerity with myself. It's fundamental. And looking at myself in the eyes, if I'm really at peace with myself, what does it change? From my point of view, nothing. One can say something, another can say something else, but if we become defensive, we lose this opportunity to see a personality trait that is perhaps better to change. It's that same game. Like if I have attraction towards someone, and if recognize I recognize a defect in that person, um, I, instead of really seeing it, I I I justify it. For me, what I've seen, if someone criticizes me, I, you know, It's just a short time ago, someone, because I was talking about another person. I was in Spain. I was talking about a lama that had been in Albagnano, and they said, "Oh, because you can't you chased him away from the center." And I said, "Really? This I didn't know." As the reality is, this person just, one day just he wasn't there. We went to bring him breakfast, and he just wasn't there. Um, have no idea. I have no idea why this person thought this. Sometimes creativity is very rich, but this aside, um, it's important to know how to listen to criticism. And if there's a beautiful attitude, in my opinion, is being able to see our errors and accepting them, and then going forward, asking ourselves how we can better ourselves without becoming defensive or doing a counterattack that keeps us from growing. Just even small daily things. We don't need to talk about great things. So we should start, with ourselves, and also towards others. We judge our actions and traits and not the person, because it can happen that I love you, I wish you the world, but I don't agree with certain aspects of yours, and and I can try to help you change that aspect if I think that that would be better for you. Okay? And here, there's something else that happens. There's a very important difference between not getting into a feeling of resentment, anger, hate, conflict, etc., and knowing how to discern that it's certain behaviors are better to avoid and others are better to cultivate, and then to do something about that. It's necessary to act. And here we get back to the first point where I said there are certain aspects in the teachings that are fundamental, but somehow they become ceremonial, and one gets a little bit lost, and people don't live them in relation to themselves. And here, if we just look at our ceiling, there's white towards the east. We have yellow to the south. We have red to the west, and green to the north, and blue is here in the center. These 5 colors make reference to the 5 ways that we should interact with the world in the various situations, mostly talking about difficult situations. Let's start in the east, and it goes in this first one, white, and in the east represents pacifying energy, this ability we have to pacify a conflict. So we live a moment, there's a problem, there's tension, it happens, some conflict, it happens, doesn't it? The first thing that we try to do is to pacify, which means there's tension. I keep a peaceful attitude, and by interacting in a peaceful way with the conflict, I'm able, little by little, to diminish that conflict until it subsides completely. It's beautiful when this happens. There's a situation of tension, and then a person is able to interact with peace, maintain his peace, and then the other one, little by little, calms down too. That tension goes away. This is beautiful. But it's not always possible. There are certain situations of tension where what happens is it's not enough. I try to just remain calm, come here. Let's just take some deep breaths together. Yeah, right. I want to see how that works out. So what happens is that second level, this escalation that happens, we go to the south, the yellow that represents this power of increase. That represents, for example, in that conflict, we're not able to pacify the conflict. Okay, well, let's go have a meal together. Or I'm going to increase something that isn't directly related to the conflict, but something that's pleasurable. So by putting energy into a positive part that to which I have access to, I'm able to overcome that conflict. An error that often happens, even between in a relationship, a couple, when there's conflict and there's something where there's possible to there's that there where it's possible to increase moments of pleasure together. Th- that's that happens, that's positive, but then one forgets to actually pacify that conflict that was originally there. So, for example, if someone is in a, is in a specific situation of anger or conflict, try to find that meeting point with that person to calm down enough, and that person feels seen and accepted, and then there's this acceptance, and there's a basis for being able to pacify that situation. This is that second energy of pacifying. Many, many different ways. You can go and have a meal together. I can see what's the meeting point that I can have with someone in a certain situation. For example, Lama Gangchen, he said that his master Panchen Lama had learned in China, that before talking about important things about work, etc., he needed to move around the politics. He would say before talking about anything, let's have a really nice meal together. Let's eat together. Let's drink together. Everyone relaxes, and then we can talk about anything. So what happens is, if you have a problem towards me, if I come towards you with something that's pleasurable, it means that I'm respecting you, and a part of that tension melts. And at a certain point, it's no longer the difficulty between two people, but just a conflict. They're looking at one specific aspect. I mean, maybe a conversation. Sometimes it's better. Sometimes the best conversations are staying silent. I've seen two people, for example, who were in a moment of conflict, and one of these, one of the two did not want to talk at all, and did didn't want to expose this moment, this level of didn't want to talk about it, and instead the other really was imposing, really thought that talking about the problem was the answer, and instead it increased the problem. In the past, for example, in Mongolia, at the time of the Khan, I don't know if it was the Kublai Khan or Genghis Khan, one of the Khans, they were quite aggressive. And there were these two different clans who were not able to talk. And when they needed to talk about something, after the third word, they ended up fighting, and there were many wars between these clans. At a certain point, there was a master, the one actually who brought Buddhism to Mongolia. Kagu Jetsun Tampa was his name. And first of all, he was like a normal person. I mean, first of all, he didn't show himself like a Lama. He wanted to win over the Mongolian people. So they, so he would give advice for war tactics, war strategies. He taught also, how to take care of animals. Um, he- and then he would explain even how to kill animals so that they would suffer less, etc. He was they loved fighting, and so he stayed outside the politics. Let's say there were these two clans, and then they asked him for advice, and so then they actually asked him to 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 lead, and he was able to really completely change Mongolia, and he was able to make peace between these two clans. So these two, but you have these two clans that are. So what he was able to find in common between these two clans that were always warring was snuff. And so he would say, because he was able to make peace between these two clans, and he'd say, no speaking, only exchanging the snuff. And so you exchange your snuff box, it's a sign of trust, because I could poison the snuff and you could do the same. So you give your snuff box to the other and vice versa, and you take the snuff in front. So it's a sign of trust. And say, oh, your snuff is so good. How is it made? And then they started talking about something that they both liked. And they were able, with this, to pacify the wars. In Mongolia today, there's this tradition to take their snuff box, to offer their snuff box, and you give yours. I mean, even if you're not used to taking snuff, and even if you don't take it, it would be incredibly offensive to say no. So you take it as a sign of trust. So this is yellow, increase. And if you can't find that meeting point to pacify, I mean, first of all, you need to find that meeting point. What do we have that's similar? Where can we increase something that's positive between us? And this gives us this possibility to pacify. It's incredibly important. Sometimes one say, okay, you make a gift, or you can do it materially, you can do it the way of behaving. There's so many ways that you can do this. But sometimes there are situations that you're not able to pacify. Finding a meeting point, you're not able to do that either. I've seen situations where you try to come into contact with, or you try to find a meeting point with someone, and it seems like whatever you do, you're always doing the wrong thing. You give a gift, and it seems like you're trying to, to buy their trust, or what. When there are certain levels of conflict and tension where that increasing power or the pacifying power don't work anymore, then we can introduce the red, which is often translated erroneously as magnetizing. I'm not sure that I like that term, magnetizing, but it's the power of seduction. This power of seduction means I go towards the other and I say, okay, just drop this conflict. It's not in your favor. You can do it kindly, or you can do it nicely. You can do it with strongly, or you can work on an idea of moralism. Say, if you keep doing this, this is going to happen to you. It's better if you let go. Or if you do it in this other way, then you'll get this benefit, So it's better for you to do it this way. So you try somehow to direct. It's a kind of manipulation, yes. Because you're trying to direct the behavior to pacify conflict. Okay? There's a particular situation and you try to use this power of influence. And it's beautiful because these 4 actions that we're talking about, after we do the complete tour, then we can look at ourselves too. This power of seduction, towards ourselves, is this ability to be able to give a direction to that maybe that we don't really want to, but it would be better for us, to seduce our own minds. And seduction used well is something very, very positive. It depends on what. If I want to seduce someone because I want to receive power or something material, maybe even hurting someone, that's terrible. Instead, if I see that you're doing something that's generating conflict that's not good for you and for others, what can I do? I try to pacify that conflict, and where there's no space for peace, then I use this power of influence. Sometimes, that this doesn't work either. Yes. For example, I get somewhere and there's some kind of like mafia gang, and I say, no, you need to pay, and I say, no, let's pacify things. That's not going to work. Okay, well here, we're friends. Here, let me offer you a cup of coffee. No, that's not going to work either. I tried to convince you. The law of karma. This is not good for you. You come. Come, I'll show you that the life of a Buddhist will be much more beneficial. So either I have to live that violence, or I go to the green, and it's the wrathful power. But I think it's better to use the term opposition, the power of opposition. You come and ask me for something. So let's use this example of the mafioso that's asking for money. If I'm not able with the other powers, but if I show you that I'm stronger than you, that you do this to me, but then what's going to happen to you is twice as difficult. I don't know. I think, in these last years, I've been really living the world of construction. I was talking to a friend so he's talking about a situation that happened about 40 years ago with his father. He was a small, he had a construction company. He made a big villa for a family, and then it happened that the person for whom he made the villa says, "I'm not going to pay you," and this person went to him. He went to talk to him. He wasn't able to convince him, and he didn't have the money to pay his workers for the job that was done at a certain point. He said, well, why are you not paying me? And he says, no, I didn't receive it. And he said, no, that I didn't get paid. And so one of these guys, just not to create stereotypes, without saying anything to the father, who was the owner of this construction company, went to that man's house. They broke they popped all the tires, and they just wrote on the doorstep, "The next one is your wife." And then the day after, he paid. And No one had to say, what it was about. There was no relationship with that. I mean, somehow he made that connection. And the father of my friend, he only found out about it after. I am totally against any form of violence because I see that it always ends badly. But there are situations where this force of opposition is necessary. Let's give you a simple example. It's not so simple, but someone is doing something that's really harmful to himself, or who's running towards, maybe he's about to kill himself with a knife. And we try to pacify, and it's not possible. We try to increase, it's not possible. We try to convince him, we're not able. So, do I use my force to stop that act in progress? This is not about hate, without anger, without wanting anything negative for that person. But there are times we're not going against the person, we're going against the action. Let's give you an example. I'm walking along the road at night. At a certain point, I see that there's someone who is someone who's raping a girl. I'm a peaceful person. Excuse me. You're not doing anything. This is not good for you. Or if I go say, to try to change his mind. That's just a side note. Forgive me. There was a lady who lived here at the Kunpen for many, many years, Teresa, and she had her house in Milan, but she lived at the center 24/7, and I dedicate a lot to her. She left us quite a few years ago now. Once these robbers, once these burglars came into the Kunpen, and one time she went to them and she put her finger behind them. She said, "Who's there?" And then another time she was living upstairs, and there were burglars who came in, and she yelled out, excuse me, the hours of the Gompa are from this time to that time," and they ran away too. But let's say, get back to this story. Say I'm walking down the street and I see an act of violence, and it's not the moment to try to pacify or to increase, or maybe I can try to influence, but if that's not possible, what do? I use strength, this power of opposition. And once I'm able to stop that person who was acting with violence towards another person, what do? It was already on the ground, stopped. Do I keep kicking him? No, because I need to see the suffering of both. Someone who is acting with violence has already that person is creating a tremendous amount of violence towards himself. So the action should be stopped and condemned, sometimes with the use of force when other methods are not possible, but the person should be accepted. I mean, there are times where I've tried so many things, and maybe then I receive an aggressive attack, and then I need to act, lawyer to lawyer. What can you do? What you can do is a lot. We don't cultivate resentment. We don't cultivate anger. Don't get into feelings of me and you and get into that game of conflict. Try a middle way, but sometimes in facing the actions, sometimes that force is necessary. The great error that we do right at the beginning, right, with the pacification, is that we use the person as a reference point. We want to judge that person. And in these four actions, what has the most immediate result? Opposition. What's the most tiresome one, but brings a result after a while is pacification. First, we have to learn how to pacify, and then learn to increase, and then learn how to influence, and then maybe learn how the force of opposition. But before you're able to use a wrathful action, this strength, force of opposition, you need to have fully master the other three types of actions. I say this so it's not, you can't say after, oh, Lama said you can do like this. No. I mean, there are aspects of our own that we need to face. The first thing is to face and accept ourselves in a peaceful way. But there's certain habits, there's certain dynamics of ours that don't deserve that peaceful way. The next step is increase. Once talking to someone who had drug addiction problems, and he said, Lama, if you come to someone like me and say, oh, don't take drugs, we say, I thank you, I know, but what you need to do, it was really a teaching for me. He said, what you need to do, you need to fill up the life with that person with other beautiful things, because life is made up of 24 hours. So when I fill up my space with other things, then I naturally take away space for those things. Obviously, it depends on the strength of that habit, that dynamic. But this is important because, for example, think about trying to stop a bad habit, an addiction, without substituting that space with something else. It's incredibly difficult. I remember a friend who wanted to stop smoking, but had that habit of having the cigarette in her hand. She said, I'll light an incense, and I'll smoke incense. You can't even smoke an incense. But there she was there, lighting the incense and sucking on this incense. And there was something that was filling up that void. And after a while, she was able to stop smoking. So when we try to take away a bad habit, we need to fill up that space with something different, something positive. Otherwise, that void is just a fertile ground to receive new seeds. So I need to increase the positive things that go into another direction. So I have a bad habit that I want to change. Where's the meeting point within myself? I need to put energy there, because sometimes we criticize ourselves, we blame ourselves for something, and we don't even give space to the beautiful things that we have, because it seems like, oh, I'm such a bad person, I'm disgusting. No, there are no bad persons. You might say some people. No, there aren't. There are bad habits. There are bad attitudes. Yes, but an ugly person. So towards ourselves, we accept ourselves, and let's look for that meeting point, those beautiful things that we want to increase. And that next step, when that's not enough because certain habits are strong, we need to use that power of influence to remember why we should change this habit, and see how to see all the negative the negative results of this habit. We need to influence, seduce ourselves. Sometimes sometimes it works, sometimes it's not enough. Once in my life, I had an experience that lasted actually a few months where my feelings were stronger than my reason. It was a crazy experience where the, just to use any example, I shouldn't drink water. I know it's not good to drink water. This water is not good for whatever reason. I know I shouldn't drink water. I shouldn't drink water. I know I shouldn't. Oh, the water's so delicious. And I don't even really like the water, but it's just stronger than me. And this happens with both attraction and also aversion. That's why Lama Gangchen would say, when these very strong emotions come, they're like oracles. The oracles are mediums, where what what they say and do is not actually coming from them, but from another from a spirit. So when you're taken by attraction and or aversion, it's no longer you. So in these months, I felt like I wasn't myself. It, if looking inside, I felt that it wasn't me. Looking from the outside, maybe one didn't see any change, but I'm really grateful for this moment, for this period, and in this case, the the necessary force was the energy of opposition. A point where we have to look at ourselves in the mirror and say, "Stop." There's not, oh, maybe this way, that way. No, stop. There are no more excuses. There's no more space for excuses. This strength of opposition is really important. A few weeks ago in Albagnano, we had the empowerment of Yamantaka, and one of the marvelous characteristics of Yamantaka is it's the embodiment, this being that has 9 heads, 34 arms, 16 legs, a ferocious aspect. If you go in every hand, there's a different weapon. In the Tibetan image, it seems a little cartoonish, but if we were to make Yamantaka a little bit more realistic, it would be incredibly frightening. In in one hand, he has a man that's impaled. It's very, very strong. And what does that represent? What does he represent? One. All the force of opposition put together and directed against ignorance and selfishness. It's a way to say, I can face that mental defilement. I have the strength to face that mental defilement. Because it can happen that in front of a certain habit or a mental defilement, we can think, oh, I'm never going to manage that. We can be afraid of ourselves, be afraid of our own. We can be afraid of our own bad habits or addictions or dynamics. Sometimes they just seem bigger than us. I mean, how in the world could I stop eating chocolate? Impossible. For me, the diet is a very good example. How bad is white sugar? Does anyone have any doubts? No. It is so bad. Really bad for you. Also because at the end of the day, it really touches our our inner system of satisfaction. It has many bad effects, and the quantity of sugar that we take, our body is not able to handle it. If you compare the amount of sugar that we eat today compared to our ancestors, it's frightening. It's said that a 6-year-old today eats more, it has eaten more sugar than a 95-year-old. A 6-year-old today has eaten more sugar than a 95-year-old. Of course, they have a hard time concentrating. And I talk about this a lot because I think it's really important. Here's a question for you. We know sugar is bad for you. So I imagine that nobody eats sugar, right? White sugar. This is, I imagine years, it's been years, years and years that you have not touched a sugary drink or put sugar in your coffee, right? Yeah, no, of course not. There's no greater lie here. Who is it is it's possible for some people to not have sugar. At my house, where they were vegetarian and you weren't and the sugar was prohibited. And for my birthday, there was grape juice. And I remember in the summertime, I'd go around my grandma's house, and she would actually let us work and then pay us $1 for a day's work. And then I would look in the newspaper. I would look in the newspaper, the exchange. And I remember one day I was on the beach and I decided to sell lemon ice cream. So I made these little popsicles and I went to sell. I went to sell these popsicles, but at my house we didn't have any white sugar, so all my popsicles were brown. And so I was 7, and I was trying to explain to the people why the popsicle was brown. Just to say all of this, that as a child, I knew that sugar was bad. I grew up in this context, knowing that sugar was bad for me. But then we say, okay, a little bit, what? That's not a problem. I mean, this is just one thing. Our diet tells so much, says so much. There are some things that we're able to eliminate just with the power of pacification, but often it doesn't work. At a certain point, we need to say, stop, stop, and stop. Basta. At a certain point, we need to take all of our energy, put it together, and say, this is not good anymore. I'm not going to do this anymore. No excuses. Yamantaka represents this force directed against selfishness and ignorance. This is power of opposition. This is incredibly important and beautiful. I repeat, we're afraid of some habits. I don't know if you've ever said, "Oh, I'll never be able to stop doing that." Happens, doesn't it? Would it be good for you if you could stop? Yes, but I'll never be able. I mean, we're afraid of certain habits. We make ourselves very little in a corner. And we give much more power to the bad habit. But Yamantaka, this being that's extremely strong in every aspect, and every hand has a different weapon that represents a different method to face the ignorance and selfishness. Where underneath every leg, there's a being that represents a form of ignorance that is crushed. What does that represent? It represents having the strength, being able to do this, because the first thing, the first thing be, that we need is believing that we can do it before we're able to start that. We need to look at ourselves, to be able to look at ourselves in the eyes and say, I can do it. And to conclude, the mantra that you did as I left, often it's used as a mantra of purification. It's called the mantra of purification. And it's interesting, our idea of purification is often connected to an idea of blame. Oh, you see how bad I am, I need to purify, so I'll do 100,000 vajrasattvas, and that way I purify. But if you read the meaning of the mantra Vajrasattva, it's one of the most beautiful mantras that exist. What does it talk about? It says that we need to be true to our own nature. Our nature, we are interdependent. Our mind can change, that we have the ability to transform. The mantra talks about recognizing our own essence, recognizing our own nature. And on the basis of that, we make a change, which means having faith in ourselves. I did something stupid? Yes. Will I repeat it another 1,000 times? Yes. Will I want to repeat it? Yes. But can I manage this? Can I do this? Yes, because I'm empty of inherent existence. I have this addiction, or I have this dependency within this context that is interdependent. So the context of interaction, and wherever there's interaction, there's transformation. So if I learn how to interact in a certain way, I'm going to have a certain result. And if I interact in a different way, I'll have a different result. So I have the tools to change, to do this. So I can change because I'm not intrinsically like this. I am interdependently like this. So if I change certain aspects, consequently, the rest will change. I don't like the result of that equation, so I need to change some numbers. I need to add this, subtract that. It might take some time, but I will get to a different result. It's fundamental for me that first of all, we look inside ourselves. We look at our own behavior, how we live, what do we do, why do we do it? And then we can look around as well, around in the world, but let's not judge people, let's judge actions. And that's not very easy. We can give many, many different examples. Oh, you can't do that thing. And then you find yourself in that condition. For example, I see in me, there are people in certain situations who do things that I think should be avoided, but I've never been in a situation like that. Who am I to say something? Once I was at the airport of Malpensa, and there were no, and at the time, you didn't have to pay, but there weren't any carts. And then at a certain point, there were some people with many suitcases, but without any carts. And it was at the time these suitcases didn't have wheels. And so there were these people who looked really, let's say, high class, well-dressed people, and they were waiting, waiting, waiting. At a certain point, this man came with these carts, and I remember these people were like, among them, they were fighting each other and just saying bad words. The bad words were flying left and right, and they were pulling the carts. And I thought to myself, what if they were fighting over food after weeks without food? What would they do? What would we do? What would I do? How can I really judge someone when I'm not in that situation? I could say violence should be avoided. I totally agree with that. But to find myself in a situation like that, how would I react? I don't know. And, these two vows that come up from this that I think are really important, because there are many different systems of vows. The ones that I think are the most that adhere most more adapted to us today, or within the Lojong teachings, the mind training. So these two vows that I really like. One says, Shinkyang Sayam Mi Shomo, and the one before says, don't talk about the missing qualities of others. In other words, don't criticize. And the following vow, and the and then the following vow is basically mind your own business. Don't think in the direction or the facts of others. About don't fill up your space. You know, so if I want to help you, I need to understand what's going on. I can listen to help you. Otherwise, what color underwear you wear, what does that change for me? Like once, it's like once they asked Lama Gangchen what he thought of homosexuality, and we're in Brazil, and he would always have these play on words. In English, the question was, what do you think of homosexuality? And he said, for me, homosexuality, I understand home sex. So what you do at home is your own business. For me, yeah, sex at home. What you do at home is your own business. I've never known anyone who was more open and had no sense of taboo, like Lama Gangchen, and that's another topic. But the fact of not putting, but not taking up our own space with other people's lives, it means we have more space for ourselves. Because when you take up space thinking about what one did, what one didn't do, or because we do this not only with those we know, we do this with people that we don't even know. Those when we're watching. I mean, or we're talking about people who've never even existed. If we're talking about TV series, or I mean, I like watching a good movie for sure. As a child, you just set me in front of the TV, I was happy. Before I would wake up before going to school to watch TV, and there was nothing on TV at the time. There was a program. There was a TV program to teach teachers. Maybe some Brazilian would remember this, but there were channels that would just do. And I would just watch. I'd watch that too. I mean, it seemed more like on principle. I would just stay watching that anyway. So I love watching good movies, but how much space can that fill up in your life? So much. One can watch a TV series and then start thinking, start actually reasoning along those lines, but it just takes up space that could be used better. So thinking about other people's lives generally, what are the possible reactions that we can have when we talk about other people's lives? We can attraction or aversion, right? What do we want to cultivate these feelings? No. So it's important to mind your own business. Okay. So these are things that really help give a direction to not judge others. We judge actions and see also the actions. Do I know everything? No. First, I need to really understand. Let's remember that the truth can be found between truths. Um, in my mind, it comes to my mind, and then I can conclude because it's already late. There's a story there. There's a story where the wife of the family wants to ask advice to the rabbi, and says, my husband, you have no idea what he's done. He does this, he does that. And the rabbi said, yes, you're right, you're right. And he listens to her, he accepts, and yes, yes, yes. And the next day, the husband goes to the rabbi to talk about the same situation and says, do you know what my wife did? There's this situation, and she did this, and she did that, and because this and that. And he says, yes, you're right, you're right. At a certain point, they go together to the rabbi, and they said, there's something wrong here. I told you this, and you said I was right. She told you that, and you said that she was right. That can't be. And he says, you're right. And the point is that things depend on a perspective. So from one perspective can be right, and another perspective can also be right. So my perspective is never going to be yours, and vice versa. And that's why it's difficult to find a reference point, and to judge is very difficult. I mean, there's some things that are more obvious, but others are more difficult. How can I judge something that I don't know deeply? And we make the enormous error is that we judge others as if that other person were ourselves, and we get to this craziness thinking that we're sure that this person thinks like this and acted like this, because if I were in that situation, I would have done like this. But there's a small detail here. You are not that person. We're different in so many different ways. I mean, has anyone ever judged you wrongly? Often, right? How often has someone really judged you in a way that corresponds to the way you see yourself? Lama Gangchen, I had this feeling with Lama Gangchen where I saw myself the way he saw me. He saw me the way I saw myself. Otherwise, it's really difficult, isn't it? It's difficult for this to happen. So when I see someone else, I try to judge that. I'm judging that person through that filter of myself, and that's an enormous error, and it's not real. It doesn't work if I do that. And the answer for myself is, people ask, why did you do it? Well, I don't know. Well, how can I know? Buddha Shakyamuni said, a being, kansa ni kansen, a being is not able to judge, let's say judge, to have certainty about what happens inside another another person, another being, and trying to do so is the cause of degeneration. I don't know what's happening inside you, why you do what you do, why you did what you do, what you feel. I have no idea. So once again, we go back to looking at actions. From my perspective, it's like it's like this, and without generalizing the person, without thinking that we are the um, that we know all the truth. I mean, we are all this touches all of us, right? So if we really want to be well, we need to do this job regarding ourselves, not others. So this is more or less what I wanted to talk about today. So now it's time for our dedications. This month, I have the calendar I don't really understand. I don't know if I don't know what's going to happen next week. I need to check. But next next Wednesday is it's the 28th. Theoretically, I should still be here. I imagine yes.
Jetsun lame kutse rapten chi namkra trinle chochur gepadang losan tempe drume sasum ki drove munsela takto ne gyur chi kewa kuntu yanda lama dang dralme cheki pela longche chi sadan lamge yente rabzo ne Dorje changi kopa nyurtoba sho nimo dele tsendele nime kuyan delekshin Nyinsen takto delek pe kuncho sumki chingi lob Kuncho sumki ngodrubo tsol Kuncho sumki trashi shon All'alba
At dawn or
o al
at dusk,
tramonto
at
sto
night or
durante il
midday,
giorno
may the
possano i
three
tre
jewels
gioielli
grant us their
concederci le loro
blessings.
benedizioni, possano
May they
aiutarci ad
help us
ottenere
to
tutte le
achieve all
realizzazioni e
realizations
cospargere il
and
sentiero
sprinkle
della nostra
the
vita
path of our
di
lives with
manifestazioni di
various
buon
signs of
auspicio.
auspiciousness.
Tashikele.
Tashidele.
Grazie a tutti.
Thank you,
Buona
everyone.
serata.
Have a nice evening.